President Trump is pressuring Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to allow deeper U.S. military involvement in fighting drug cartels, especially those producing fentanyl. During a tense April 16 call, Sheinbaum rejected the idea of U.S. armed forces operating in Mexico, instead offering cooperation through intelligence sharing. Trump has publicly warned that the U.S. may take unilateral action if Mexico doesn't dismantle drug cartels, criticizing Mexico's effectiveness in handling the crisis. Despite rising tensions, both leaders have maintained communication, with Sheinbaum emphasizing bilateral cooperation while rejecting any actions that violate Mexican sovereignty. While Mexico has made some concessions, including troop deployments and extradition, officials say further security cooperation has limits due to historical and sovereignty concerns. The GOP is moving away from its free market roots, embracing Trump's populist, protectionist trade policies as seen in the Senate's rejection of Rand Paul's anti-tariff resolution. New Republican leaders like Senators Moreno and Hawley support fair trade to protect American workers, aligning with Trump's anti-globalist stance. Think tanks like American Compass are driving this shift, prompting tariffs and state intervention over traditional tax cut-focused conservatism. Traditional conservatives and business groups remain uneasy, as tariffs cause market volatility and strain relationships with longtime GOP allies. Despite criticism and poor polling, many Republicans back Trump's trade war, viewing it as a needed shift to prioritize working-class Americans. Ukrainian President Zelensky and U.S. President Trump met privately at Pope Francis' funeral in an effort to repair their strained relationship following a contentious Oval Office encounter in February. The Vatican meeting, described as brief but productive, led to Trump softening his stance on Ukraine and voicing rare criticism of Russian President Putin. Despite some diplomatic progress, including a new economic deal and a temporary ceasefire proposal, Trump has not committed to further sanctions in Russia or significantly altered his view on Zelensky. Zelensky's confrontational style and use of symbolic gestures have earned domestic support, but have sometimes alienated Western allies, especially Trump. Analysts view the meeting as atmospherically positive, but ultimately insufficient to change the core dynamics of U.S.-Ukraine relations under Trump. A federal judge in Texas ruled that President Trump's use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members was unlawful. The judge determined that the gang's presence in the U.S. did not constitute an invasion, which is required under the law to justify such deportations. The decision marks the first direct legal defeat of Trump's attempt to bypass standard immigration proceedings using wartime powers. The ruling does not prevent deportations under other immigration laws, but it blocks reliance on the Alien Enemies Act for expedited removals. The Trump administration continues to seek legal avenues to enforce stricter immigration policies, including filing emergency appeals to the Supreme Court. President Trump removed Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor after only 102 days, following controversy over Waltz adding a journalist to a Signal chat discussing sensitive military plans. Trump announced that Waltz will be nominated as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as Interim National Security Advisor. Waltz had already fallen out of favor with Trump and his team due to ideological differences, poor media performance, and staff hires that didn't align with Trump's base. The Signal chat incident, dubbed Signalgate, sparked a political uproar and led to a broader scrutiny of Waltz and his staff, some of whom are also being removed. Rubio, already influential in Trump's foreign policy, now holds a dual role and has gained prominence through aggressive diplomacy and a major State Department overhaul. Global companies are rushing to ship goods to the U.S. before July 9 to avoid steep tariffs following President Trump's 90-day pause on reciprocal levies. The surge in imports distorted trade data, with U.S. imports jumping over 40% in Q1 and contributing to a $162 billion goods trade deficit in March. Businesses like Christmas retailers, whiskey distributors, and furniture makers are expediting shipments, facing uncertainty about whether tariffs apply at departure or arrival. The import spike temporarily boosted economies in Europe and Asia, with Taiwan and the Eurozone reporting strong growth due to increased U.S. demand. Experts warn this front-loading will likely cause a drop in exports later in the year, with some companies already struggling to manage perishable goods or rising shipping costs. Senator Lindsey Graham is pushing a bipartisan bill to impose severe sanctions on Russia and steep tariffs on countries that buy Russian energy if Russia refuses to negotiate peace in Ukraine. The bill, which has over 60 Senate co-sponsors and growing support, could override a presidential veto and signal strong bipartisan resolve to pressure Russia. The legislation proposes a 500% tariff on imports from countries purchasing Russian oil, gas, or uranium, with potential major impacts on nations like China, India, and Iran. Graham emphasized the bill as a tool to support peace negotiations, but insists the Senate must act if Russia continues its aggression. A similar bill in the House is also gaining traction, with supporters confident it could pass even without full leadership backing. U.S. tariffs have sharply reduced demand for Chinese goods, prompting major ocean carriers to switch to smaller ships or cancel trans-Pacific sailings. The 5 largest container ship operators report that bookings to the U.S. are down by at least one-third, with some replacing 18,000 container vessels with smaller ones. Smaller carriers have already canceled about 2,000 sailings for May, and the Port of Los Angeles expects container arrivals to fall over 30% this week. While some Chinese manufacturers are shifting production to Southeast Asia, the increased volume from there is not enough to offset the shortfall from China. Carriers hope a tariff resolution will revive trade by summer, but recovery would still take over a month even if a deal is struck soon. President Trump held a rally in Michigan celebrating his first 100 days in office, highlighting his economic and immigration policies amid growing voter concerns. While he praised tariffs as a tool to boost American manufacturing, some supporters expressed doubts due to persistent inflation and high living costs. Despite a strong performance at the rally, public opinion polls show declining confidence in Trump's handling of key issues like the economy and inflation. Trump defended his record, attacked pollsters, and reiterated promises to put America first, while also criticizing the Federal Reserve and pushing for deregulation. Reactions among attendees and locals were mixed, with some praising his boldness and others fearing cuts to essential services and the consequences of his policies. DECT and other manufacturers striving for all American products face major obstacles, as some essential components like ball bearings are unavailable or too expensive domestically. Companies like Rapid Plastics and Haas Automation report that U.S. suppliers for key parts disappeared a decade ago or can't meet needed qualities, making full domestic sourcing impractical. Tariffs on Chinese imports have sharply increased costs of U.S. manufacturers, putting them at a competitive disadvantage compared to foreign rivals with lower tariff rates. Some progress is being made with companies like Corvent Medical shifting much of their supply chain back to the U.S., although sourcing complex components like motors and transistors remain difficult. Even companies that fully meet the Made in USA standard, like Chanela, worry that rising domestic material demand from tariffs could eventually disrupt their operations. After focusing heavily on domestic priorities during his first 100 days, President Trump is now shifting attention abroad, emphasizing trade deals, peace negotiations in Ukraine, and high-level diplomatic trips. Domestically, Trump continues to consolidate executive power through deregulation, new executive orders, and proposed tax cuts and immigration initiatives. His aggressive trade policies, particularly tariffs on many countries, have strained U.S. alliances and created economic uncertainty, with trade negotiations becoming a major task for his administration. Internal divisions, policy disagreements, and declining poll numbers are starting to surface, though Trump's support among core Republicans remains strong. As Trump looks ahead to the 2026 midterm elections, he faces the challenge of stabilizing the economy and global relations while maintaining political momentum amid growing Democratic opposition. Leaders from about 10 elite universities, including Ivy League schools, have secretly formed a collective to resist the Trump administration's efforts to control research funding and academic independence. The universities are coordinating strategies behind the scenes to push back against demands they see as infringing on their autonomy, such as changes to admissions, hiring, and teaching practices. The Trump administration has warned against such collective action and threatened to cut billions in research funding, revoke tax exempt status, and limit international student enrollment. Harvard's public rejections of sweeping federal demands, followed by a lawsuit against the administration, intensified private and public resistance among universities. Although university leaders aim to protect core freedoms, they may consider minor concessions to allow the White House to claim victories without compromising essential academic independence. President Trump's first 100 days back in office have been marked by major disruptions in trade, foreign affairs, and government operations, highlighted by his unconventional leadership style. Key moments included a billionaire-failed inauguration, Trump attending the Super Bowl, and Elon Musk leading aggressive federal cuts as head of the Department of Government Efficiency. Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, clashed publicly with Ukraine's President Zelensky, and oversaw the removal of the Black Lives Matter Plaza mural. His administration also dismantled the Department of Education, staged a high-profile immigration crackdown in El Salvador, and launched controversial new tariff rates at a Liberation Day ceremony. Widespread protests erupted nationwide against Trump and Musk's policies, especially in response to Doge's impact on the administration's hardline